Among the many tasks facing the incoming Yoon Suk-yeol administration is that of building national unity, given what pundits claim was a polarizing presidential race. For more, I have Professor Song Se-ryun from Kyung University. Welcome, Professor Song.
Good to be here. Thank you.
I also have Professor Cho Hik-young at Hongik University live on the line. Welcome back, Professor Cho.
Thank you.
Professor Song, the 20th presidential election was the most closely fought race in the country's history, with President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol defeating his rival Lee Jae-myung by less than a percentage point.
Right.
What are the implications of this reality?
Well, the election was decided by some 250,000 votes, but that's not the lowest vote differentials. That price goes to election happened in 1963 when the vote was decided by 150,000 votes. But, as you said, in terms of percentage spread, it's the most tightly contested elections. But if you look at the content of it, there's nothing to boast about. There were, this election was billed as a contest to pick the lesser evil. There were a lot of negativities, so probably there are a lot of points to improve about. But at the same time, 77% vote rate is not too shabby, and also a lot of issues came out. So everything is said and done. We have a new president with the opposition party still massive. They have 172 seats, which is close to supermajority. So I think if we can assume the infinite wisdom of the voters, the message seems to be that, well, you have the president and the opposition in a very formidable fashion, so get along. I think that the message is that this governing has to be made with a lot of cooperation and collaboration, which we have not seen much. So I think the story will be made with the new administration, and depends on what they do.
Right, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Professor Cho, according to one recent survey, some 52% of Koreans believe President-elect Yoon will live up to public expectations with regard to state affairs. What are your prospects?
Before I address that, if I may add a couple of comments to what Professor Song has said, I find it remarkable that in this election there were actually more dead votes, so miscast ballots, than there were the number of votes that decided the actual outcome of the election. So there were some more than 30,000 ballots that were essentially miscast, and so they couldn't be counted towards the result. And the election was only decided by some 20 or so 20,000 votes. And so that's one thing that's remarkable. Second thing, 77% voter turnout is really nothing to be sneezed at. I know of countries where it's compulsory to vote. You have to pay a fine if you don't go and vote. And even there, you don't get more than 60%. So I think it really speaks to the level of our participatory democracy that we have this kind of voter turnout. Now, in terms of expectation of the president-elect, I really hope for the sake of our nation that he will be up for the task. But what I have seen so far doesn't really fill me with a lot of confidence because Mr. Yoon has had a very narrow range of life experience. He's been a state prosecutor for 27 years. Before that, he spent 9 years studying for the bar exam. All throughout the campaign process, he really has shown himself to be more of a strongman type of mold rather than the kind of modern president that our people, I think, are really looking for. And so I fear that there might be some misfit or a gap between what people expect from the president as opposed to the kind of leadership that Yoon is used to. I say this because he has really been in a hierarchical organization all his life, and he hasn't really had much experience or skill in terms of compromises, negotiation, those kind of situations where you really require a lot more openness, flexibility, humility, respect for the other. And so this is why I am a little bit concerned, but I do hope that he will be able to step up to the task.
Right. Professor Sung, this particular race was also one of the most divisive, with clear lines drawn across, that is, age, gender, and geographic regions. What are your thoughts?
Well, as Professor Cho is saying, I agree with her in that this contest was not really exemplary. There's no K-politics yet. We cannot really say that Korea is exemplary in the politics area. However, I do think that in this negative, very less than exemplary situation, the election did turn out a lot of issues. And the young people get to see that their votes count. Democracy is noisy. I think that the fact that a lot of issues have been put on the table, regardless of any capabilities of the candidates that did not really instill confidence, I think that the institutions, political institutions in Korea is robust enough that if you manage well, the national dialogue will continue, and those issues that were put on the table will somehow see the resolution. I think a lot turns on what the incoming government does, and also the opposition government's willingness to talk and get to a constructive position.
Right, and keeping in mind what Professor Song has just said, Professor Cho, would you say the task of establishing national solidarity is of utmost importance then for the incoming administration?
Completely, and because the incoming administration is actually in no small part responsible for aggravating the division that was starting to grow within our society. Now, I put this down essentially to the fact that we are living in a very rapidly changing society, and what we used to hold as being certain is no longer certain. And this is especially true for the younger generation, people in their 20s and 30s, those who are just about to embark on their professional careers, truly become a full participating member of the society, whereas previously they might have been essentially students with no full sort of right to have their kind of say in what's going on. But statistics tell us that the people in their 20s and 30s, the so-called MZ generation here in Korea, are the first generation who are looking at having lower standard of living than their parents. Up until now, thanks to the rapid and expanding development in Korea, we've always had the hopes of having a better future than yesterday, but it's no longer the case. So the younger people now don't necessarily have the expectation that they're going to earn more than their parents. They're going to live in better houses, have better cars, whatever, in terms of material wealth. And plus, they don't really have the positive prospect that the society can offer. All the changes in technology, society, culture, it's really sort of coming to converge, and what we know so far is no longer the case anymore. And so young people are filled with fear and uncertainty about their future. Now, in other countries, this kind of fear and uncertainty has very often translated to essentially hate towards outsiders, and that's mainly migrants and foreigners. Here in Korea, because those groups are mainly the competition for the younger people, but here in Korea, especially for young men, the competition is not really migrants or foreigners, because they are not really competing for the same kind of jobs, but actually women and older generation. And so I think this is one big cause of the the gender and generational conflict that we were already beginning to see starting in 21st century. But what the incoming administration through their campaign has done is to actually exacerbate and really polarize the different groups by trying to appeal to this particular group of young men in their 20s and 30s by crafting special policies for them and privileging them above any other group, to the extent that they were almost practicing misogyny and discrimination against younger women. And so I think the incoming administration has a lot to answer for the state of deepened divisiveness in our society right now. And they really need to get their act together and do as much as they can to restore a semblance of unity.
Right, and before I go back to the gender conflict that you mentioned, Professor Jo, I'm going to ask Professor Sung about this question before we go back to that. How do you respond to the incoming administration's calls for a special pardon by the incumbent administration for former President Lee Myung-bak?
Right, the presidential power, it's a political power, and it's controversial because it's a political power. Those in the opposition side will always criticize. I think that although it does not have the function of correcting any judicial decisions, I think if it's used well, you can have a national unity by resolving a lot of differences and past wrongdoings. So I don't have any qualms about the president having this awesome power. It's controversial in Korea, in the United States, other countries. But I think it has uses if used well for national unity. Now, the particular question of Lee Myung-bak, I think that on one hand, we recently had 2 past presidents in the prison, which in any viewpoints, it's not a pretty sight. I think that it has to be corrected. And besides, former President Lee Myung-bak is 80 years old. So in that sense, I would look at his age and say, well, be bygones, be bygones. So I personally would be for pardoning. But I think that people opposing the idea of absolving the former presidents, I think that they can put their efforts in some other contemporary and more fresh issues.
Do you suppose the pardon by the Liberal government at the moment would perhaps serve as a symbolic gesture, so to speak?
Yeah, that's the main point of national unity, because although they were very passionate about looking at the past wrongs and making it right, I think the message has been sent, especially to the young people. Social justice was the main key issue in this election, although paradoxically and ironically, the president who really pitched at that point got hurt by it, by losing the election. But I think that the stage is set, that we can look at it in a more broader perspective.
Right. And Professor Jo, how should the Yoon administration approach its pledged restructuring of the government, including the possible dissolution of the Gender Equality Ministry?
I think slowly is the answer. Don't rush into things. Certainly, it was one of the key campaign pledges to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality, or actually how it is known in Korean as Ministry of Women and Family. And that was one of the pillars in their policy that was trying to appeal to the younger men. But I haven't really seen much detail about how they're going to divide the work that's actually currently done by the Ministry of Gender Equality to other divisions, because the work that they do is actually not just about women. It's about families, it's about teenagers, it's about children who don't have proper care within their family structure. So, how are they going to actually take up the work and, manage the resources? And one other thing that this ministry does is to actually look after the victims of digital sex crime. That's a really important issue that's actually growing in our society. And I really haven't seen any detailed plan about how they actually propose to do this. And even within the Conservative Party, there are loud voices that say the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family should be actually augmented. It should be given more budget to do their job properly. And so I don't think they really should prioritize abolishing of ministries. All president-elects promise to essentially, downsize the government and get rid of this division or that department, or even abolish ministries. But in the end, they come back to the sort of the mean and end up restoring them what they have abolished or gotten rid of in some form or another. And so I really would like to advise them to approach this matter with caution and some thought.
Right. Professor Song, some pundits believe that the transition period that we're looking ahead to may be quite bumpy. Do you agree?
Yes, by design, I think. Not by design, but the reality is that the incoming team, if they're not careful, or whatever they do, would look like a victory dance, kind of despising the other. And the outgoing team might think that this is a last opportunity to use or exhaust their power to impede or put on their people on the various posts. So we've seen in the past and historically, court packing is a famous example of putting their people in. However, seeing that this close campaign, close election, had the message of those two parties have to work together if they want to get anything done. I think there is more of an incentive for both parties to cooperate. Unfortunately, we have not seen that yet.
Right, and hopefully we'll see more of it in the near future. And now, Professor Zhou, you touched upon the vitriolic division between men and women in their 20s and 30s that was very well exposed during this particular election. Having said that, and I understand this will be a tough question, but now that is the problem, what do you suggest to address that particular problem?
The solution is not going to be easy because it stems from the fact that the whole economy and society is changing, shifting paradigm. As I said earlier, I believe that a lot of it has to do with the structural change that we are experiencing, which is really filling young people with uncertainty and fear about their future. Particularly here in Korea, the societal expectation of young men is that they should still be the breadwinners. They should still be earning more than women do. They should be providing for their family. They should have jobs that they can be proud of. They should have steady income, secure positions, essentially be a success. And given that we have some 80% of our young people who have with college degrees, their expectation of the kind of job that they should get, given all their effort in studying and working hard, is much higher than what the economy can offer them, because the kind of middle class white collar jobs that these people are after are disappearing, and they're being replaced with something, but we don't really know what they are yet. So this is why I think this uncertainty and fear is essentially alienating them from other groups, and they are seeing the others as their competition. And what the political groups have done is to really exploit that and deepen the divide. And so what we need to do is essentially ease that pressure on young people and to let them know that one job is not going to decide their entire future. Strengthen our social safety net, strengthen our welfare system, and give them the chance to fail and then get up on their feet again. We are so harsh towards failure in our society, and it is as if unless you get a great job immediately after you graduate graduate from university, your life is over. Essentially let them know that that's not the case, give them more opportunity. And that's not something that's easy to do. And so this is why I think government policies are so important at this point, because we need to point the country in the right direction so that we can actually move with the technological change and open up new possibilities, new frontiers, and new opportunities. But I'm not really seeing that happening among the politicians right now.
Right, unfortunately. And keeping in mind what Professor Cho has just said, Professor Song, how can those within the political arena then seek to address this animosity between the two genders, very briefly speaking?
Well, the gender animosity is not new, but I'm afraid to say that our tradition or religion or whatever has not equipped ourselves with the directions as to what the future holds. I think that this issue needs to be solved by dialogues and looking for new ways. And the encouraging sign is that young people are involved, which they are facing the issues on a daily basis. So it's uncharted territory, and if this election served anything, as I said, they put this one on the table. And it's not going to be quiet, it's not going to be peaceful, pretty noisy, but we have to expect that with the right attitude of trying to get to certain resolutions, I think they're earnest in dialoguing and getting to the result. I think that's something that we have to be prepared for, rather than saying that this is the right answer, we gotta get to there.
Right, so coming to the dialogue table with the right attitude would be very important then. Professor Song, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Cho, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.